Before I get into the main subject matter of this video, I just want to mention in passing the Düsseldorf axe attack. I haven't been focusing on it too much because I've been busy today with other things, but apparently the attacker was a Kosovar Muslim who had mental health issues. Well, pick from that what you will. Like I said, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at the reports. I am always a bit wary of mental health being used as an explanation in these cases. I'm not saying it's not legitimate, but sometimes it can then end up as an excuse for what really is a terrorist attack. Um, the fact this attacker was Muslim, whether it was an Islamist attack or whether he just happened to be a Muslim, well, again, believe what you will. But anyway, the reason I'm mentioning it is because I actually spent 6 hours sleeping in that train station in 2015. My train had been cancelled and it was a long, long night. It's a big concourse, so obviously it's always a bit strange when you hear something on the news and you have some sort of personal connection, albeit in my case a very small one, but yeah, it's a bit strange. Um, Another time that happened was when I slept at King's Cross Station, the same week it was bombed, in an Islamist attack here in the London bombings back in 2005. So that's, I suppose, the second time that's happened. I'm not suggesting it's some sort of strange thing. It's just for me noticeable. Okay, so I watched a documentary by BBC Four entitled "When Borat Came to Town." When Borat came to town. This documentary is from 2008, so it's already 9 years old, but it is really worth checking out because it is quite a revealing look into the world of the Romany in Romania. Um, and it's in reference to the villagers of a place called Glod, small village in central Romania, who wanted to take, or at least some of them wanted to take legal action against the producers of Borat and Sacha Baron Cohen. Borat doesn't really need an introduction. It's a very well-known film, but just in case you're not familiar, basically, Sacha Baron Cohen is a British comedian. He's well known in the UK for the Ali G show, which was popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. And he has released several films which are mockumentaries and become big hits. Borat was the first, where he played this Kazakh journalist, so called, who went to the United States to learn about American greatness and make Kazakhstan a better country. He then followed that up with his really gay character Bruno, gay Austrian fashion guy. Then the Dictator, where he played kind of an archetypal tin pot dictator, loosely based on Gaddafi, I think. And most recently Grimsby, which I'm not that familiar with. I think it was probably the least commercially successful. Borat was a huge success. It got something of a cult following. Probably one of the most successful mockumentaries ever made, commercially speaking. Now, the actual scene set in Glod, which literally translates as far as I know as mud, is relatively short. It's about 5 to 10 minutes in the opening sequence, and it's basically this character Borat, who's presented as being very crude but not meaning to be, just very backward in his mentality. Um, it's supposed to be his village in Kazakhstan. Of course, it's not in Kazakhstan; it's in Romania. Um, and I think the issue that the villagers had was they felt they'd been misled. They felt they were, or some people felt they were exploited. And this documentary basically focuses on one family. Now, before I talk about that and before I talk about the documentary, I just want to mention that there were Romanians on the comment section getting irritated because they said this is giving a negative perception of Romania. But to be honest, I think people watching it know full well that Romani are not the same as Romanians, like i.e., the majority of non-Roma Romanians. Um, my father visited Romania in the early 90s, and at that time it was a poor country, but in the past 10 years it has developed a lot. It's maybe not quite a level of the economies of Western countries, but I would say it's an example of a smaller country doing well out of the EU overall. Overall, I'm aware there's been big protests recently over mistrust of the Romanian government, but anyway, the Romanians on this, although I have to say those comments were probably from the time, from the late 2000s, so it could have been a different situation then. They were getting annoyed because they felt that this is how outsiders would see Romania as backward, and they were saying things like, "Oh, come to Bucharest, we drive, posh cars," and it's. I know that. I know that one documentary isn't a picture of an entire country, but to be honest, the BBC has documentaries about inner city Britain. We know it doesn't represent the whole country, so I think people shouldn't be so sensitive about that. So yeah, the documentary focuses on one family, and in particular, a teenage girl and her father. The teenage girl has aspirations to be an actress in Spain, and the father is sort of the unofficial village leader. I'm not sure if he has the status of a mayor, but he's sort of the unofficial leader of the village, and he strikes me as a man who has his heart in the right place. Um, So basically, at one point in the documentary, and this really is quite a backward place. It's they have no running water. It has the conditions you would expect in sub-Saharan Africa. It really is a backward place, and I'm not saying that to be insulting. It's a fact. And even the teenage girl herself says this is not a good place. You really get that feeling that it is a really back end of nowhere, so to speak. Um, anyway, the father clearly has his heart in the right place because you get the impression this is a man who cares about trying to improve the situation, but he goes up against difficulties because a lot of the local men all they want to do is drink and you know make demands of him like you promised us this, you promised us that, and I very much got the impression that this is a man who's trying to do his level best, but he's being fucked over by those in power and not appreciated by those he's trying to help. Anyway, at one point, this really slick American lawyer came in via a German. I, I don't know if the German was a translator. I'm not quite sure what the German man's role was, but maybe he was just the liaison for the American lawyer. But this American lawyer really, basically, he came in and he met these people, those villagers who were persuaded to take further legal action against Sacha Baron Cohen, because they felt they'd been misled, they felt they were underpaid. Um, and what basically happened was this American lawyer sat down with them, to break the ice, and he said, "I'm Jewish. My people have suffered in history, and so have your people." He was very blunt about everything. He sort of said, "You're gypsies, aren't you?" Then he had to be corrected there, Romany. And the whole approach of the guy was very Rambo-esque, like, we're going to make Sacha Baron Cohen pay, and we're going to make his life a misery. And his whole pitch was clearly trying to get these people on board. And he actually promised them to bring them to Hollywood, to bring them to the Academy Awards and crash Sacha Baron Cohen's party. I guess that year, I don't know, but I guess Borat was nominated for Best Picture that year. Well, that never happened. They did go to London, and this is a part of the documentary that really got me. They went to the London headquarters of 20th Century Fox, and at that point, this really slick lawyer suddenly changes tune. And these people, with the exception of the father figure, that the other men that were with him were, you know, they were ignorant people because they didn't even know that London was in England. They couldn't differentiate that. They said, no, London is a long way away. And I'm not saying that to be cruel or insulting, but it's just a fact. They are ignorant, in the sense that they don't have the education about the outside world. That's no fault of their own. They just don't have that access to that education there. But anyway, the lawyer then basically dropped them in the deep end. He said, "We cannot go in because we're lawyers." And he gave them this piece of paper and he said, "You just go in." He didn't give them any indication of what they should do. He just said, "Point to this." And on this piece of paper it was some sort of legal document. It said Sacha Baron Cohen, aka Borat, and then 20th Century Fox, Rupert Murdoch. when you think about it, he's got these poor Romanian Roma, or these poor Roma, and he's throwing them in the lion's den, going up against a multinational corporation with no idea what they're supposed to do. So they went in. The security said, "We don't know who you are. Stop filming." Um, and the whole thing was just very much. These, I honestly felt sorry for them at that point because it just looked blatantly like they'd been exploited by this lawyer. And for him to put them in the deep end like that, now maybe he couldn't have gone in himself, but he should not have put those men in there to, they couldn't speak English. The receptionists couldn't speak Romanian, so they were completely lost. And I just felt so sorry for them. Um, and then what happened? The back in Glod, whilst this was all going on, the young woman, um, they're quite a conservative society in the sense that young girls are expected to get married in their teens, and there's that pressure. And the young man that she was with, that the family had set her up with, ended up stealing from the shop, which got her down in the dumps. And then the father, then she ran away, and she didn't dare to tell the father when he returned that that was the reason. Then he suffered a heart attack. And in the end, he just, this was a man who just felt as though a world was collapsing in because he felt he'd been screwed over by Sacha Baron Cohen, screwed over by the lawyer, and he suffered a heart attack actually. And you see him in the documentary just lying on his bed in tears, and it's quite hard to watch actually. Um, so it's a revealing documentary. I've got mixed views on it. On one hand, the people in the village weren't exactly helping matters because they were being very hostile to the filming. Now, on one hand, you understand that because they felt they'd been betrayed by Sacha Baron Cohen. But on the other hand, if they're complaining about looking backward and then saying, "I'll kill Sacha Baron Cohen," well, I'm not sure if that necessarily helps image. Um, Also, at any point in the documentary when the father was trying to help the villagers, when he was saying we need to do this, we need to do that, when he was trying to organize, all he got was grief, and all he got was drunks telling him, "Well, what are you going to do for us?" And it seemed to me that he was the only one really trying to take some responsibility. On the other hand, this doesn't make Sacha Baron Cohen, in my opinion, come out in a very good light. I mean, maybe legally they done nothing wrong. Maybe they were paid, the villagers were paid apparently the equivalent of €4. Um, but the money that Sacha Baron Cohen made from that film was in the millions, well into the millions. Now, they could have given a little bit back to at least provide the village with running water or something like that. I think they should have given something back. Because although the appearance in the film was relatively short, about 5-10 minutes, it was very important. And I saw some of the comments. People were saying things like, "Oh, why do they care about how they are portrayed? Because they're backward anyway." But in the end of the day, they're human beings, and no one would like to be portrayed in a certain light. Now, at the end of the documentary, there's a caption saying 20th Century Fox gave them waivers and they all signed it. But they also acknowledged that, incidentally, a US district judge threw the case out. She argued that there was not enough to go on in the sense that there was no clear clear charge that they were pressing. Um, but I really do think Sacha Baron Cohen, or at least the producers, could have given something back. Basically they went in there, they made these people look like fools, and then they went out. And based on the interviews that the people were talking about in the documentary, for example, one guy in Borat, he's presented as the town abortionist. Well, of course he's not. And he resented that, and his family resented that. Now, I find it hard to believe that 20th Century Fox really spent a great deal of time making sure that these people knew what they were getting themselves in for. They insist that the people knew it was a film and not a documentary, but my impression is these people could be very easily misled. They're not intelligent people. They're not educated people. Now that might sound patronizing, but it's the truth. They're not educated people. So in other words, they're very easy to exploit. And I think that's probably what happened. And so a lot of people were kind of getting into real anti-Romany sentiment in the comments, and I find that a little bit unfortunate. When it comes to anti-Ziganism, I believe that's the term for anti-Roma prejudice. This is a long and complex issue in Europe. Obviously, after the Jewish people, the Roma were probably the next most persecuted. Obviously, the Slavs and gay men and communists and other groups were also persecuted in the Holocaust. But um, there is a long track record of the Roma being marginalized groups. Now, some people, and I'm not going to make this very long because otherwise the video will go on for a long time, but I think it's very important to look at case by case examples. I don't believe that the Roma are always entirely innocent because it's a bit like within the Irish traveller community, they too resent being presented in a certain light. But in the end of the day, if every media appearance you make is threatening people with violence, you can't really complain about a bad image. And for example, in the Irish traveller community, the way that the men in that community settle disputes is by fighting. Now, granted, most of it is among themselves, but they wouldn't think twice about laying someone out for looking at them the wrong way or disagreeing with them. So there is, frankly, a thuggish culture within the Irish traveller community. And if they don't like that image, then, well, they need to dispel it. And they could start by not always, you know, resolving every single thing with violence. Um, so I think there's a lot of ways to look at this. That's not to say, incidentally, that the Irish traveller community and the Roma are exactly the same. They're not. Incidentally, no one even knows for sure where the Roma originate, whether it's Egypt or if they're Indo-Iranian peoples. Um, I think unquestionably there has been examples in European history of persecution. The impression I get from the majority of Romanians is basically they're scum, they're thieves, they don't work, etc. I'm always a bit wary of those sort of that sort of vilification of a people. We see similar things in the UK, and there have been tensions in this country as well. At the time of the 2005 election, it was quite a hot topic, actually. Um, and there have been examples of local councils having to mediate between disputes between local people and Romani encampments, and sometimes it gets ugly. It turns into violence, and I really don't know. I don't think that they're as innocent as they always claim to be. But on the other hand, I do think that there is genuine discrimination going on because if you tell someone that they're a scumbag enough times, if you treat people like they are always, lazy, stupid, basically little better than animals, then at some point they're going to, if you push people into a corner, they're going to see it as they how can you expect people to improve their situation and to be motivated if you're constantly running them down, if you're constantly telling them that they're worthless. So I do have some sympathy for the Roma community. I have known a few Roma, um, and those who I have known, I have to say, I've never got the impression that they are nasty people, that they are aggressive, that they are anything like that. Those who I have known have been nice people who happen to have been on hard times. Now, I'm not saying that's a whole picture. I'm not going to be naive and say there are not Roma who cause problems because there probably are. But I know that there has been situations where there has been tensions. In Romania in 1993, there were some Romanians who got into a dispute with some Roma. And what happened was the Roma ended up stabbing. Well, a young man came to sort of intervene because his father was having this dispute with the Roma. They stabbed him. Then they went into a house. Now a mob formed. They demanded that these Roma come out to, give themselves up to the police. They didn't. Three of them ended up getting lynched. So it was basically a pogrom. Um, but I think when it comes to this, it needs to be looked at on a case by case basis. I don't think across the board you could say they're all, they're all scum. I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking. That's the way totalitarian regimes think, and it's the way I do not believe in vilifying an entire group of people. On the other hand, I don't believe that it's always necessarily a case that they're victims of some big scheme to keep them down. I think sometimes they're their own worst enemies based on some of the attitudes they have. I mean, not that you can judge from one documentary, but in this documentary, that this father was trying his best to improve life in the village, and all he got was drunks telling him, what are you going to do for us? And it did seem, you know, they came across as a bit like not willing to take responsibility themselves, and they were all putting it on into the responsibility of this man. As for the lawyer, I really, got a bad impression for him. For him to leave these poor people in the deep end in 20th Century Fox Studios, that's just despicable. As for being Jewish, well, Sacha Baron Cohen's Jewish, so. But I do think when all's said and done, whatever you think of this, and even if 20th Century Fox didn't break any laws, there is a moral question. And this village was dirt poor. Now, given the money that film made, I think they should have given something back. And frankly, I'm not going to lie, I found Borat very funny in many scenes, but I think they could have given something back to that village. Just something. And as far as I know, they didn't bother. So, anyway, I'll leave the documentary here. Let me know your thoughts. I'd like to hear from Romanians or Roma people. Um, if you are Roma, let me know your thoughts. I've tried to be balanced in this video. I've tried not to make sweeping statements. And I certainly am not making this video with the intention of hurting anyone or insulting anyone, but everything I've said, there is some basis for those observations. So let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching.